Welcome back, everybody. Sorry for the delay, but we finally found our speaker, Mike. Mike, welcome. Where have you been?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Time just gets away from you, all the time here. But I have to blame the AV kind of stuff too. So that was my fault, and I apologize. But I'm here now, so I'm excited to be here.
Good. All right, we're going to kick you off right away because we're short on time. On top of the hour, we'll have a chat with you about any of the Q&A. Good luck.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming. I really appreciate everybody coming to this. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's talk a little bit about, from the SRE perspective, how do you handle multi-cloud? And I think it's a really interesting topic. So let's first define, and hopefully this is still moving here. Define what is site reliability engineering. I'm sure that you guys have been in other sessions today, so I'm not going to go over this like tremendously, but I want to define, what multi-cloud is from an SRE perspective. So, Google are the ones that really define this, and they say SRE is what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operation team. So let's think about that. Let's think about this from the software engineering perspective, and let's think about, how would you go about this, if you're going about it as a software engineer. So first of all, what are some of the tenets? And we're going to kind of map these together to the multi-cloud area. So some of the tenets of SRE are, the important ones here. I'm not going to go through all of these, but monitoring is very important. Pursuing maximum change velocity without violating a service's SLO. So we're going to talk a little bit about SLOs here and how they map to multi-cloud and what kind of things you can look at from an SLO perspective. Also, how do you handle emergency response? That's stuff that, is in multi-cloud. It's also across the board. Change management, the same thing. Demand forecasting and capacity planning. These are things you have to consider. Are you going to spin up more nodes? Now, the first thing I should also mention too, is that we're looking at this from a cloud native perspective. And when I say cloud native, I'm talking mainly containers and, and things that you would use within that cloud native. So if you're in a traditional infrastructure, I'm not saying don't do that, but what I'm saying is my focus happens to be around the cloud native area. So the other things are provisioning, efficiency, and performance. So these are all areas that you have to think about when you're thinking about site reliability. So when we're looking at the focus on engineering, this is all defined by Google. They're saying operational work should be 50% of the time. What does that mean? That means that we should be able to take a look at what we're doing, and we should be able to script or program or architect our way out of that so that 50% of the time we shouldn't have to be doing the work. And they also say that there should be a maximum of about 2 events per 8 to 12 hours on a call shift. So these are all things we want to think about when we're thinking about this multi-cloud aspect. And believe me, I don't have a lot of slides, so just stay with me here. We're going to go right into the crux of it. Change management, you got to be able to implement changes, but you have to do it in a way that allows you to do it, mitigating your risk. So we're going to talk about how to mitigate your risk there. Provisioning. So this is a big one. We're always provisioning new things. You're going in that stack. You're going to provision to multi-cloud. You're going to say, hey, I need to deploy a backend, maybe on-prem, and maybe a front end in a cloud, or maybe they're both in the cloud, but in different tenants. Whatever it is that you want to do, you have to think about that. You have to think about your infrastructure. You have to think about the network. You have to think about load balancing and how you're going to deploy these apps. So these are all considerations that we're going to talk about. Okay, SLOs. So when you think of SLOs, you might not have heard of SLOs as much as SLAs. So SLAs is a business function. That's mapping the business value to, the kind of inherent risk that you have if a service should be down for any amount of time. What a SLO is an objective that matches, how much time you need to be up or how much time you're determining. It's not mapping it to the business level objective, which would be the SLA. So we're going to talk a little bit about SLOs and what those mean and how you visualize it and how you kind of manage that application, using service mesh and a multi-cloud. So here's some considerations. I totally stole this slide from a Google book somewhere, so hopefully they won't get me for it. But this is, you know, a typical application here. And you usually have a lot more services, and we'll see some of those services when I do a demo here. And most of this is going to be demo and me walking you through certain things. Now realize that we have a very short amount of time, so I really can't go in depth with a lot of things, but you could always look me up online, and I'm going to have a lot of other, things that you can see and learn. So this is typically what a flow looks like for an application. You have some kind of user. That user looks up a server through DNS. It goes through some kind of reverse proxy, maybe a global services load balancer, goes to the application front end. That application front end speaks to an application backend. Now that application backend speaks to DBs. Now that is true of a more traditional approach, but now those application backends and those application front ends really are made up of a lot of different microservices that may or may not be written in different languages. So, you know, we have to consider the complexity of all this and how this gets established. So when we're thinking about things like how to deploy this, we want to make sure that we deploy it in a way that's templatized, if that's a word, and and allows you to deploy it the same way every time in a way that is, is going to be deployed correctly. Also, we want to make sure that we check in and out these applications so that there's some kind of gate that we can use without limiting, how fast we can deploy, because we need that agility too. So a lot of complexity, a lot of different, kind of governance that you need to consider. But we want to keep that so that we can still have that agility. So what do we want to think about? And these are the things we're really going to focus on. I know it's only a few things. We only have 30 minutes, so I really can't focus on a lot of things. But I want to talk a little bit about deployment strategy. I want to talk about observability. And I want to talk about alerting and monitoring. So let's start it out. We have an application, and this should be it for the slides. So let me switch over to the thing over here. So we have an application first, and let's look at a typical application. I'm just going to bring up Visual Studio Code. So here's a typical application, and I'm looking at a YAML file. I have a front end and I have a back end, right? So this is what's going to be deployed. This is, if I was to, this is all in Kubernetes, and this is the whole YAML kind of layout I have here. So you can see that I have a deployment. It has a few different services that are put together here. And this really isn't, I'm not saying this to make you understand this code. If you don't, if you do, great. What I'm showing you is the complexity you have to think about here. So what I'm looking at here is a bunch of text and a bunch of different elements that kind of, map together in order to create an application. If I deploy this front end somewhere, it's going to deploy all these services. Same thing for the back end over here. Now, you generally don't want to deploy this, from the command line every time. You don't want to manually deploy it, is what I want to say. So you have to think about systems, and this comes into kind of the deployment process. So those systems usually are pipelines, things like that create some kind of CD, or that will allow you to deploy something. So the way that I've done it here is I have this Terraform cloud that I'm using right here. And this Terraform cloud points to a GitHub. And if this was on auto apply, then anytime you push something up here, it would automatically deploy this to my to the tenant cluster that I have here. So this would automatically create that first piece. So now what you have, if you look here, if I look at the GitHub, I have all this stuff defined. So really the only thing that changes is maybe the version. And we might define a version in there that we'll use in order to deploy to our clouds. And this is very important because when we are deploying to the cloud, we want to make sure there are things called subsets, and subsets allow us to define the different versions that are going to go into here to deploy to those different clouds. So let's take a look at it. So I'm not really going to go in depth in the Terraform piece of this, although I'd say Terraform is very important. And by the way, if you don't want to use Terraform Cloud, It's a very nice way to do it, but you could do the same thing in Terraform and just trigger this through webhooks or something else where you can kind of trigger all of this together. But the important piece of this, and this isn't the piece I want to kind of dig in because I think the other stuff is more relevant to the multi-cloud side of this, but I think this is an important element to all of it, is the way that you deploy this. So whether you use Terraform or whether you use some other kind of methodology, the key here is making sure that you're always doing it the same way every time and changing as little as possible. So, but what do we need in order to deploy this to multi-cloud? Well, the first thing we're going to need is, in order to really give us visibility and to make sure that we have this reliability, is something called a service mesh. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a key point here. So I have this service mesh up right now, and let me see if I can move this out of the way. Here we go. I have this service mesh here. And what is a service mesh? Okay, so a service mesh allows us to give us the observability over multiple tenants or multiple tenant clusters within something like Kubernetes. And it allows us to define the traffic policy over those particular tenants or tenant clusters. So for example, here, and this is what I typically like to show, is that I might have an application here. So this is an application I have deployed. And I have, you can see 4 different pods here. And this is the front page, the catalog, the bookings, and there's also a load balancer service, or a load service, I should say, over here. But what you notice is that when I have the services here, I have way more services defined than I have actual pods. And that's because on this particular cluster right here, I am only running 4 of these. And that means that even though they have these services advertised, a lot of these services, like the notification service, is actually running on a different tenant cluster. So if I was to look at what I have here, and I switch this back to the EKS, or actually, I should say, hopefully you guys can see this. Let me just.
Mike, could you embiggen the fonts, please?
Yes. Okay. Sure. Yes.
Embiggen.
Is that the word there?
Yeah. Apparently, it's a Simpsons word, but if you can make it a bit more bigger, then that would be great for me and my.
Shift plus. There we go.
Yay.
Is that this? I don't use Zoom a lot, as you can tell. This thing keeps coming up on me. This hide not. No, I'm trying to hide the video because it's kind of getting in my way.
We don't see it unless if that.
Yeah, it's just getting in the way of my command line here. I see it. That's the problem.
I'm sure you'll figure it out.
Yes. So let's go to EKS here, and I'm going to move my thing right back here, and let me move that back. So now if we look at the other cluster and I look at the same thing, come on, don't make a liar out of me. Come on. All right. You got to love when stuff doesn't work when you're demoing stuff. Anyway, if we did look at the other cluster, you would see those other services are running on that other cluster. And for some reason, it's not running right now, but we'll still be able to visualize it from the other areas. So it's not important. What is important is, I have to find here it is the visualization. So let's look at what something like this looks like. So let me go to the live view here. And by the way, this is a sneak peek. I had to get permission here to use this, but this is a sneak peek of a new solution that we have at Cisco. But this is what's called Service Mesh Manager. It's an Istio service mesh. And what this does is allow you to visualize that service mesh. So let me just make this a little bit bigger and kind of move it around here. And what you notice is that there's 2 clusters. There is a cluster that's master, and there's a cluster that's EKS front end. So this is a typical scenario. You have your front end cluster and you have your master cluster. And I apologize because the one that says master should really be front end, and the one that says EKS front end should really be master, but we deployed to the wrong thing. So never mind. This was just a demo environment. But anyway, so what you see here is you see the front page, you see the bookings, you see the catalog, you see all the different services, and these are all the services laid out over these 2 different clusters. From our perspective, what we want to think about is, how do we deploy new services without really affecting some of these old services? First of all, let's talk a little bit about the mesh. So we can see that we have this service mesh here These things are all communicating across the mesh. They're communicating across 2 clusters. We can see the traffic here. So we can see that we have 5.4 requests per second, 4.8. We could even see things from 95th latency, how many milliseconds it's taking to go across, and we could see the security and all of that kind of stuff going through here. But let's say we wanted to deploy new services here, and I'm just going to click on movies because I have this already defined. So on movies, if I click on there, I see a contextual view. And by the way, you can do this all from the command line too in Istio. I think it just shows better from this perspective. So you can see I have traffic management here. Now, this might not be the way that we want to kind of define it, but if we were going to edit this, and let's say we had a V4, we might want to change some of this and add a destination that's still movies. But we might want to make it V4. And still over the same port, but we might only want to make it 10%. And obviously I'd have to change all the other ones here, but we might have one that we want to introduce, and we might want to introduce that for only 10% of the traffic. And what that does is makes it so that the majority of the traffic is still getting the other pieces of this, and only a small percentage is going over there. So you're reducing your risk in order to introduce this service. Now, you might say, okay, but you still have some risk there. So you could look here, there's something called circuit breaking. So this is what creates resilient applications. That's the definition right here. And you can actually configure these so that you can say how many connections, connection timeouts, connection pool settings, outlier detection settings. So these are different errors and intervals. And basically, if you start to get these, then it'll look at some of the other services. So there's also one other area I wanted to show though. If you go under services and pick one of these services, I'm sorry, it's under workloads. Go to workloads. You also have your canary settings here. So this is what enables all the deployment of the canary deployment of the workload. So request success rate threshold. This is the minimum request success rate. This is the traffic shifting weight, the maximum number of consecutive failures, maximum requests. So all of this stuff kind of allows you to configure your service so that it looks out for those errors and looks out for what's going on there. So again, reducing your risk. So, it's really important that when you're deploying these services that you do it really slowly, and you do it in a way that makes it so that, you're not going to bring down your whole solution set. Now, how do you verify and how do you look at these things to make sure that everything is kind of working the way that you think it should? And how do you alert on this stuff? So if you look at our services here, I can click on these services and I can set something called service level objectives. So these service level objectives are what I said before. They're objectives that you set based on what availability or uptime you want. So you can see that there's a bunch of them here. Right now I have analytics 30-day rolling latency. So I can create a new one, and you could do this in a lot of different solution sets. This just happens to be in this solution set, but the idea is the same. So you could look at your request success rate, your request duration, the percentage of successful HTTP responses, and all of these you kind of set, and you have, and let me just go into one of these that looks pretty bad. You have what's called a predicted burn rate. This is the amount that it thinks that you're going to burn through, or the rate that you think you're going to burn through. And this is how much budget you've consumed already. So you can see I'm way out of compliance on this one. And you can see the compliance rate here. So all of this looks pretty bad at this point right now. And don't worry about the yellow line. It's because the way I have this set up to proxy, it's not liking it. This allows you to look at the strategy and kind of see where you are within that SLO budget. But it's important that you set up these kind of rates here and set up exactly what you're looking to do. So here's the burn rate threshold, which I can set to be whatever it is that I want. And I can set how far I want to look back, my look back window, and when do I want to alert? Do I want to alert immediately? Do I want to alert after several days? What is it that I'm looking for? And then it defines the severity. What do I want to do? So you can say ticket or page. So I could either page, it could be a pageable event, or I could just create a ticket somewhere. And then it will, if I said create, it would actually do that. And you can see there's a bunch of them already here. And I could just click on one. So this one's looking back 1 hour. It's looking, the look back window is 5 minutes, and it alerts after 2 minutes. And you'll see that I get a page there. So you set up these SLOs, and these SLOs basically build up, and the combined services, all of these things might be combined to create your SLA, which then gets mapped to a business objective. So I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if we take questions here. Do we have questions? Or I don't know how this, I don't know if this is interactive, or how's this work?
I mean, you have a few minutes left, and I've been monitoring the chat.
Okay.
But I don't think there's anything. There's a little bit of a delay. So if anybody does have any questions.
Yeah, I know I don't have that much time left, so I didn't want to go into too much. I know that, I was a little bit late. I so apologize for that. But I definitely want to take any questions. I know that we went through a lot here, and I'm kind of, and mentioned a lot here. I'm going to go, if you want, I'll do more thorough videos on these. In the next few months, I'm going to put a bunch up on my YouTube. So if you just look for me on YouTube, I'm sure you'll find them.
Yeah, cool. I mean, how about this? How about we just wrap it up with a little chat and tell people to submit your questions. Everybody come with your questions, and otherwise we'll just have a nice little chat. So what did happen before you dropped in? Was it just technical issues, or?
Yeah, there was all kinds of technical issues. I don't know if it's maybe because I'm coming from the US and it's, coming across
late
there.
ping.
It took a while. Maybe it was the plane ride in. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, at least you don't have a jet lag, I hope.
yeah, definitely. So, but I definitely, yeah. So if you guys have any questions, feel free. Otherwise we can wrap up, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was very pleased to see Terraform Cloud in your.
I saw your bio, and I knew you'd be very proud to see that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody on the call knows, or on the call. I mean, watching the show. But Cisco and HashiCorp recently announced a very cool partnership together. So this is quite nice.
I love it. I mean, I love the integration between the, Terraform, and there's actually an agent on our IKS, which is our Intersite Kubernetes service, or actually Intersite itself. And you could deploy anything you want, from Terraform to there. So you don't actually have to deploy anything on-prem. You could just kind of connect it together and hit go.
I mean, in theory, you could if you wanted to, but if you really want to be in a cloud, multi-cloud is everywhere.
Yep, absolutely. So hopefully everybody learned a lot. And, I know we had a real little amount of time here, so it's very hard to get everything into there. But I do appreciate everybody coming.
Absolutely no problem. Did Charlotte, did you have a question?
I did, yes. Sorry, the SMM you showed, you said it's based on Istio.
Yes.
Is there a specific reason you chose it over Linkerd, or is it just because Istio's everywhere and it's better?
Or console?
We may or may not look at other things to back end this. So I'm not sure yet. That was the first one out of the box. We're still evaluating other pieces of it. SMM theoretically could do any back end. It would be cool if it could do a lot of others. So we'll see. We're gonna look into that.
Cool. Excited to see.
I think the last question is that a sin? Is that a modular sins behind you?
Absolutely. Come on. This is, if you really want to see, I have a full, come on, look at that.
Yes.
That's how I geek out, besides programming and doing DevOps and everything. That's it. That's the system right there.
I'll slide into your DMs about the music stuff, because I'm interested in talking about that more.
I love that stuff. I used to actually create control surfaces for like big, huge bands that you probably know. So Cool stuff. I use my tech for
Very
good.
cool. We'll talk about that later because I think Ricardo will also want to talk more about that. Charlotte, I think
okay, cool. I like it.
thank you so much. Thank you again, and you have to pop into the next one, I think.
All right, guys, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.